ASMR. Today we're going to be doing another Commander deck attack video, and today's commander is Saheeli, the Sun's Brilliance. So it's an Izzet Artifact deck essentially, and the commander here is blue and a red for a 2/2 human artificer, and she has the ability blue, red and tap. Create a token that's a copy of another target creature or artifact you control, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. It gains haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. And the first card we have is Mind Stone. 2 mana for an artifact that taps for colourless, or you can pay 1, tap it and sack it to draw a card. Next up is Cyber Conversion. Blue for an instant. Turn target creature face down. It's a 2/2 Cyberman artifact creature. Universal Surveillance. X blue for a sorcery. With Improvise. Draw X cards. Clockwork Fox. 3 mana for a 3/2 fox. When it leaves the battlefield, you draw 2 cards and each opponent draws a card. The Great Furnace, which is a non-basic artifact land that taps for red. A basic mountain. Another basic mountain. Talisman of Creativity. 2 mana for an artifact that taps for colourless, or it can tap for blue or red, and it deals 1 damage to you. Ingenious Artillerist. 2 and a red for a 3/1 human artificer. When 1 or more artifacts enter the battlefield under your control, it deals that much damage to each opponent. Astral Dragon. 6 and 2 blue for a 4/4 dragon with flying. When it enters the battlefield, create 2 tokens that are copies of target non-creature permanent, except they're 3/3 dragon creatures. In addition to their other types, they have flying. Saheeli, Sublime Artificer. 1 and then Izzet for 2 for a planeswalker with 5 loyalty. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create a 1/1 colourless servo artifact creature token. And then you can remove 2 loyalty. For target artifact you control becomes a copy of another target artifact or creature you control until end of turn, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. Access Denied. 3 and 2 blue for an instant. Counter target spell. Create X 1/1 colourless Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying, where X is that spell's mana value. Reverse Engineer. 3 blue for a sorcery with Improvise. Draw 3 cards. Commander Sphere. 3 mana for an artifact that taps for any colour in your commander's colour identity. You can also sacrifice it to draw a card. A basic mountain. Skirvo Schematic. 2 mana for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield or is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, create a 1/1 colourless servo artifact creature token. Zephyrin Void, a non-basic land that when it enters you scry 1, and it taps for colourless. Felden of the Third Path, 1 red for a 2/3 human artificer. You can tap it and pay 2 and a red to create a token that's a copy of target creature card in your graveyard, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. It gains haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. Desolate Lighthouse, a non-basic that taps for colourless, and you can pay 1, a blue and a red to draw a card, then discard a card. Reliquary Tower, a non-basic land that taps for colourless, and it also lets you have no maximum hand size. Midnight Clock, 2 and a blue, for an artifact that taps for blue. You may pay 2 and a blue to put an hour counter on Midnight Clock, and at the beginning of each upkeep, put an hour counter on Midnight Clock. When the 12th hour counter is put on Midnight Clock, shuffle your hand and graveyard into your library, then draw 7 cards, exile Midnight Clock. Myriad Landscape, a non-basic land that enters tapped. It taps for colourless, or you can pay 2 and tap it, and sacrifice it to search your library for up to 2 basic land cards that share a land type, and put them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. Thought Monitor, 6 and a blue for a 2/2 construct with flying and affinity for artifacts. When it enters the battlefield, draw 2 cards. Mere Battlesphere, 7 mana for a 4/7 Mere construct. When it enters the battlefield, create 4 1/1 colourless Mere artifact creature tokens. And when it attacks, you may tap X untapped Mere you control. If you do, Mere Battlesphere gets +X/+0 until end of turn, and deals X damage to the player or planeswalker it's attacking. Mechanized Production, 2 and 2 blue for an aura. Enchant artifact you control. At the beginning of your upkeep, create a token that's a copy of enchanted artifact. Then, if you control 8 or more artifacts with the same name as one another, you win the game. A basic mountain. Junk Diver, 3 mana for a 1/1 bird with flying. When it dies, return another target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. Saheeli's Artistry, 4 and 2 blue for a sorcery. Choose one or both. Create a token that's a copy of target artifact, or create a token that's a copy of target creature, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. Buried Ruin, a non-basic land that taps for colourless, or you can pay 2, tap it and sack it to return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. A basic mountain. Emery, Lurker of the Loch, 2 and a blue for a 1/2 Merfolk Wizard. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each artifact you control, and when it enters the battlefield, put the top 4 cards of your library into your graveyard. You can tap it to choose target artifact card in your graveyard. You may cast that card this turn. Temple of the False Gods, a non-basic land that taps for 2 colourless, but you can only activate it if you control 5 or more lands. Solum Sicarium, 4 mana for a 2/2 golem. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. When it dies, you draw a card. The One Ring, 4 mana for an artifact with indestructible. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you gain protection from everything until your next turn. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life for each bird encounter on the One Ring, and you tap it to put a bird encounter on the One Ring, and then draw a card for each bird encounter on the One Ring. Oaken Siren, 1 and a blue for a 1/2 Siren Pirate with flying and vigilance. You can tap it to add blue, but spend this mana only to cast artifact spells or activate an ability and artifact source. Ash Barrens, a non-basic land that taps for colourless, or you can basic land cycle in it for 1 colourless mana. Detection Tower, a non-basic land that taps for colourless, or you can pay 1 and tap it, and until end of turn, your opponents and creatures your opponents control with hexproof can be the targets of spells and abilities you control, as though they didn't have hexproof. Opal Palace, a non-basic land that taps for colourless, or you can pay 1 and tap it to add 1 mana of any colour in your commander's colour identity. If you spend this mana to cast your commander, it enters the battlefield with a number of additional +1/+1 counters on it equal to the number of times it's been cast from the command zone this game. Idol of Oblivion, 2 mana for an artifact that you can tap to draw a card. Activate only if you created a token this turn, or you can pay 8, tap it and sack it to create a 10/10 colourless Eldrazi creature token. Sundial of the Infinite, 2 mana for an artifact where you can pay 1 and tap it to end the turn. Activate only during your turn. Joyra's Familiar, 4 mana for a 2/2 bird with flying. Historic spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Reckless Fireweaver, 1 and a red for a 1/3 human artificer. When an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, a Reckless Fireweaver deals 1 damage to each opponent. Grand Architect, 1 blue for a 1/3 Fidelkan Artificer. Other blue creatures you control get +1/+1, and you can pay a blue mana for target artifact creature becomes blue until end of turn. And you can also tap an untapped blue creature you control to add 2 mana to your mana pool. You can only spend this to cast artifact spells or activate abilities of artifacts. A basic island. Intruder Alarm, 2 and a blue for an enchantment. Creatures don't untap during their controller's untap step. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, untap all creatures. A basic island. Mirrodin Besieged, 2 and a blue for an enchantment. As it enters the battlefield, choose Mirren or Phyrexian. If you choose Mirren, whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 1/1 colourless Mirror artifact creature token. And if you choose Phyrexian, at the beginning of your end step, draw a card, then discard a card. Then if there are 15 or more artifact cards in your graveyard, target opponent loses the game. Castle Embereth. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a mountain, and it taps for red, or you can pay 1 red and tap it. For creatures you control, get +1/+0 until end of turn. Threefold Thunderhulk. 7 mana for a 0/0 gnome. It enters the battlefield with 3 +1/+1 counters. And whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, create a number of 1/1 colourless gnome artifact creature tokens equal to its power. And then you can pay 2 and sacrifice another artifact to put a +1/+1 counter on Threefold Thunderhulk. Phyrexian Triniform. 9 mana for a 9/9 Phyrexian Golem. When it dies, create 3 3/3 colourless Phyrexian Golem artifact creature tokens. And it has Encore 12. Nimblewright Schematic. 2 mana for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield or is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, create a 1/1 colourless construct artifact creature token. Arch of Orkaza. A non-basic land with Ascend. It taps for colourless, or you can pay 5 and tap it to draw a card. Activate if you have the City's Blessing. A basic mountain. Foundry Inspector. 3 mana for a construct, for a 3/2 construct, sorry. Artifact spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Circuit Mender. 3 mana for a 2/3 insect. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life. And when it leaves the battlefield, draw a card. Sky Diamond. 2 mana for an artifact. It enters the battlefield tapped, but you can tap it for blue mana. Sage of Latnam. 1 and a blue for a 1/2 human artificer. Tap it to sacrifice an artifact. Draw a card. Captain Storm. Cosmium Raider. Blue and a red for a 2/2 human pirate. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target pirate you control. Emergence Zone. A non-basic land that taps for colourless. You can pay 1 and tap it and sack it, and you may cast spells this turn as though they had flash. Forsaken Monument. 5 mana for a legendary artifact. Colourless creatures you control get +2/+2. Whenever you tap a permanent for colourless, add an additional colourless mana. And whenever you cast a colourless spell, you gain 2 life. Rise and Shine. 1 and a blue for a sorcery. Target non-creature artifact you control becomes a 0/0 artifact creature. Put 4 +1/+1 counters on each artifact that became a creature this way. And it's got overload cost of 4 and 2 blue. Wandering Fumarole. It enters the battlefield tapped, and you can tap it for blue or red. You can also pay 2, a blue and a red, for it to become a 1/4 blue and red elemental creature with pay 0 mana. Switch this creature's power and toughness until end of turn. It's still a land. Third Path Iconoclast. A blue and a red for a 2/1 human monk. When you cast a non-creature spell, create a 1/1 colourless soldier artifact creature token. Soul Ring. 1 mana for an artifact that you can tap to add 2 colourless mana. A basic mountain. Reef Worm. 3 and a blue for a 0/1 worm. When it dies, create a 3/3 blue fish creature token with, when this creature dies, create a 6/6 blue whale creature token with, when this creature dies, create a 9/9 blue kraken creature token. Arietti's Tempting Apple. 4 mana for a food. When it enters the battlefield, you gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature. It gains haste until end of turn. You may pay 2, tap it and sack it to gain 3 life. Or you may pay 2, tap it and sack it for target opponent to lose 3 life. Mycosynth Wellspring. 2 mana for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield or is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Masterful Replication. 5 and a blue for an instant. Choose 1. Create 2 3/3 colourless golem artifact creature tokens, or choose target artifact you control. Each other artifact you control becomes a copy of that artifact until end of turn. Sai Master Thopterist. 2 and a blue for a 1/4 human artificer. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 1/1 colourless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. And you can pay 1 and a blue to sacrifice 2 artifacts to draw a card. A basic island. Prized Statue. 2 mana for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield or is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, create a treasure token. Hellkite Tyrant. 4 and 2 red for a 6/5 dragon with flying and trample. When it deals combat damage to a player, gain control of all artifacts that player controls. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 20 or more artifacts, you win the game. 1000-Year Elixir. You may activate abilities of creatures you control as though those creatures had haste, and you can pay 1 and tap it to untap a target creature. A basic island. The Mycosynth Gardens. A non-basic land that taps for colourless. Or you can pay 1 and tap it to add 1 mana of any colour. And you can pay X and tap it for it to become a copy of target non-token artifact you control with mana value X. Girapur Aether Grid. 2 and a red for an enchantment. Tap 2 untapped artifacts you control. It deals 1 damage to target creature or player. A basic island. Whir of Invention. X blue 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 for an instant with improvise. search your library for an artifact card with converter mana cost X or less, and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Ichor Wellspring. 2 mana for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield or is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, draw a card. A basic island. Unwinding Clock. 4 mana for an artifact. Untap all artifacts you control during each other player's untap step. Arcane Signet. 2 mana for an artifact that you can tap to add 1 mana of any colour in your commander's colour identity. A basic island. Evolving Wilds. A non-basic that you tap and sack to search your library for a basic land card. Put it onto the battlefield tapped and then shuffle your library. Spectrum Sentinel. 1 mana for a 1/2 soldier. It has protection from multicoloured, and whenever a non-basic land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, you gain 1 life. Broody-clad Telcor Engineer. 4 blue-red for a 4/4 Phyrexian Artificer. Creature tokens you control have haste, and at the beginning of your combat on your turn, create a 2/1 blue Phyrexian Mere Artifact creature token. Then you may choose a token you control. If you do, each other token you control becomes a copy of it. Mere Retriever. 2 mana for a 1/1 Mere that when it dies, return another target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. Enthusiastic Mechanaut. Blue and a red for a 2/2 Goblin Artificer with flying. Artifact spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Triplicate Titan. 9 mana for a 9/9 Golem with flying, vigilance and trample. When it dies, create a 3/3 Golem Artifact creature token with flying, a 3/3 Golem Artifact creature token with vigilance, and a 3/3 colourless Golem Artifact creature token with trample. Temple of Epiphany. Enters the battlefield tapped, and when it enters you scry 1. You can tap it for blue or red. This is one of the Snarl cards. I can't remember the name. I want to say it's Frostboil Snarl. And when it enters, you can reveal a mountain or an island. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped, and it taps for red or blue. A basic mountain. Shimmer Dragon. 4 blue for a 5/6 dragon with flying. As long as you control 4 or more artifacts, it has hexproof, and you can tap 2 untapped artifacts you control to draw a card. A basic island. Poetic Ingenuity. 2 and a red for an enchantment. Whenever 1 or more dinosaurs you control attacks, create that many treasure tokens. And whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 3/1 red dinosaur creature token. It only triggers once each turn. Command Tower. A non-basic that you can tap to add 1 mana of any colour in your commander's colour identity. Exotic Orchard. A non-basic land that you can tap to add 1 mana of any colour that a land an opponent controls could produce. return an artifact you control to its owner's hand. You may put an artifact card from your hand into play. And then we have Vilgry Familiar as the last card. 3 mana for a 2/2 fox. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life, and when it dies, draw a card. I've been Foamy ASMR. I want to thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. And if you leave a comment below, I'll get back to you. I'll see you in the next video.